Hello, ladies and gentlemen. You're back once again with the Economancer. Today, we're going to go back over some of the stuff that we talked about in relation to Econ John. So, I was looking at some criticisms of functional theories, and functional theories is essentially what economics uses to derive conclusions. That's what we're talking about between myself and Econ John and other economists and some sociologists and stuff like that. And so, one of the major criticisms of these functional theories are that they are tautologies and circular arguments. And this has been going around for so many years that people just continuously beat this down. And in modern day and age, where we have so much work in this complex adaptive systems, it just seems like this argument will not cease to exist. And if you've watched any of my videos, you've seen some of this idea being brought out in the 1950s and 60s. And yet it's still here. It's still coming. And as complex adaptive systems continuously push forward and start taking up parts of science that it didn't typically, especially social systems, we start seeing more and more of these arguments being called. Okay, so what is this idea? So one of the major criticisms of it is that they're tautologies, circular arguments. So what is the relationship between cause and effect? Does cause precede effect, or is there some motivation for nonlinear causality? First, we kind of need to discuss what is linear and nonlinear causality. So, linear causality is X causes Y. This is the mechanical or Newtonian reductionistic, deterministic, and predictable with certainty driver that most of science is based off of. So we have to be aware that X exists prior to Y, so that's this temporal stance. So X must come first, then Y, then we can look at it and go, yep, X caused Y. Then we have nonlinear. So nonlinear causality is a complex system. You can think of the climate or an ecosystem. So that is properties of emergence, spontaneous order, adaptation, and feedback loops. These properties make linear reduction impossible, or as near as impossible as you can think, to model. So is this a reasonable criticism? First, the functional revolution was predicated on quantifying inputs and outputs in mapping, say, social actions to a system. Again, this is Weber, Durkheim, Parsons, so on and so forth. Thus, the model, the system for, say, a linear regression, as what happened with the Friedman line, right? So again, the Friedman line goes Weber, Knight, into Friedman and Stigler. Both of them are very big proponents of the Weberian model, also through Popper, right? So what happens if we throw chaos and complexity into the mix? That makes the social system no longer irreducible. But does that end the conversation? Is that the answer? In my opinion, no. Though a system is not reducible to a single cause in a linear model, we can extrapolate quite a bit from all that complexity. Suppose you have two countries getting hit by the same supply shock, but the economic responses are heterogeneous. So we know the cause did not have the same effect, and that the responses of both countries are recursive. Recursive meaning that it's relating to a repeating process of whose input at each stage is applied as the input in the succeeding stage. So in our analysis, we can find or not find these similarities. Once we find these similarities, we can hold them constant. So fiscal response, consumer behavior, or whatever. And then we can search for and find different responses in the macroeconomic sphere, say monetary policy. Now, does monetary policy answer the entire question of the dynamics in the system? No. But what it did do is identify divergence criteria and measure these post hoc outcome differences in multiple domains. And then we can include historical responses for comparison. And once again, we can apply continuously this same deductive process, which leads to a set of conclusions. The responses may be different and they may be chaotic. It's still reducible to some extent, and then we have observable facts in the system, and we can, this would be like the Caldor facts and stuff like that. These are things that we can look at and we can say, this is a fact under all the different system dynamics. This is pretty much what happens every time, and we can take that as a general rule, and then we can hold those general rules equal among other societies or organizations or systems. So ceteribus paribus. So this leads into, what does any of this have to do with communication in economics? So we're going to have to take a step back, and this is going to be explained more in another video. I just want to make sure we were understanding this linear versus nonlinear causality idea. So when we take a step back, we have to look at these basic statements of communications in economics. So first, what is communication? Well, in systems theory, it is simply utterance, information, and understanding. Communications can be considered the basic unit of operation. Now, why does this matter? Well, you can think of things like specific codes for self-organizing, and they operate like selection mechanisms. So, looking at social sciences, specific coding would lead to economics, sociology, political science, and then those internal codes would have the selection mechanisms for what is useful or isn't useful, so on and so forth, and allowing this evolutionary dynamic within the fields of economics, sociology, and political science. Now, when we look at economics, we have this very basic idea that prices are signals of the expected value of some good or service. This was noted by Friedrich Hayek and others. I mean, even Michael Munger currently still uses this analogy. And what this allows is that there is a communicative process that handles the increasing complexity of change. And it allows us to do this at a much faster rate. Because think of the amount of complexity that would happen, right? So let's say I am going to sell you a goat, and you're going to sell me a cow. This starts creating more complexity when we're trying to figure out the use value, the exchange value, and stuff like that of these two. What's our long-term expectations for the animals versus our short-term needs for the animals, so on and so forth. All of this gets reduced by making money something that's the medium of exchange, because the price itself encapsulates all of that information. And we're going to get more into information and communication theory as this goes on. But the best way to think about this is the communicative process of this medium of exchange of money reduces the complexity of exchange, makes it a lot faster. And then once we build on top of this, we see expectations of selection drive competition. So value versus cost is why competition happens. So far, there's nothing radical in this basic communicative term in economics, and it goes much, much further and much, much deeper, and we can take it to some of the bigger models. Because as it stands now, we can look at, basic supply and demand and go, yeah, this makes sense because the prices are signals. Why wouldn't we take that same idea and expand it outward into the more esoteric parts of economics? And I think that's really the goal here, is to take this most basic foundation of price signals, this communicative process, this medium of exchange, all of this, and expand it much, much greater into, some of the larger models associated with institutional growth or, economic growth, so on and so forth. And with that, I'm going to be going next into some videos going into communications theory. One of them will be on double contingency, what that is, why that matters. Be looking at information. What is information? Why is information used? What are some mathematical models from like Shannon and Weaver? What does that look like? How does that even apply to economics? Has this been done already? Because right now we do know that there is a communicative turn in sociology. And some of the sociologists have done some work in economics, obviously. Talcott Parsons was a part of this initial communication revolution in sociology, and he was an economist. He was not a trained sociologist. He was a trained economist. So it's obvious that there is a lot of overlap between these two, and it seems like the current economic sphere focuses in the beginning on that communication term, but now they're focusing more on this functionalist because they want predictive power and stuff like that. And all of that's fine, especially when we're looking at it from the idea of forecasting, predicting, and stuff like that. But it seems as we're moving into this information age, we're moving into things like narrative economics, etc., that we're going to want this secondary mechanism, because it doesn't have to be first, this secondary mechanism of the communication turn in economics to really focus in and to really understand how some of these communication models can be used in the macrosphere. Because as it stands right now, it's mostly used in the microsphere in very, very specific instances, such as the triple helix model. But how can we expand it out? And then we're going to look at some of that after we get this basic information down. So I hope this works, and I hope y'all enjoy this video. Thank you so much. And please like, share, subscribe, comment, call me an idiot, you know, the good stuff. Have a good one.